Good morning. Welcome to Ashland Center Church of Christ. Man, I feel a lot louder since this speaker got plugged in. Sorry for you. It is a beautiful day, absolutely gorgeous. I got to walk to church today, and I just got to tell you, I hope that when I tell you things like that it's a beautiful day and I love that it's sunny outside, it's just such an encouragement and a blessing and just a praise to God because, man, I love being here. I love being here in Grant and sharing ministry at this church. It's wonderful. So I'm glad that you are all here with me this morning. And today we are going to continue through our series, The History of Us, but we're going to do it with a little caveat. We're actually going to start a sub-series, and we're going to look at the Ten Commandments. So for those of you who like to follow along in Scripture, we're going to be in Exodus 20 today, specifically focusing on the first few verses. And just kind of bring you up to where we are at this point, what we've covered. Remember that as we began Exodus, we found Israel in slavery to Egypt. And they had really been in Egypt for about 400 years or so when we find them in the beginning of Exodus. And they enslaved the people and they forced them into labor, and then when God calls Moses to go and be his intermediary as he is going to free his people, they make the labor even harsher. And so Israel's having a really tough time. And at the beginning, they don't even want anything to do with Moses because Moses is making things worse for them. Okay, but then God begins to work his power in Egypt. And he begins to show who he is, and he begins to show Egypt that he is the one true God. And he takes the power away from their pantheon, from the power of their gods, through the plagues that he brings to them. And he brings Israel up out of Egypt. And when Egypt decides, man, we got to go get them back, God says, don't worry, Israel, I've got this. And God fights for Israel, not helps Israel win. God says, you guys just cross the sea. I am going to take care of one of the most powerful armies on the face of the planet. And he does this for them. And after that, he leads them through the wilderness, through the desert of Sin, into the wilderness of Sinai, and he brings them to himself as he said he would at Mount Sinai. And he says, prepare yourselves because we're going to have an interaction. And he kind of begins to establish, as we'll talk a little bit about, he begins to establish his covenant with his people. And he says, I am going to make you a people unto myself. I'm going to adopt you. I'm going to care for you, watch out for you, guide you. I'm going to enter into this special relationship with you. And then he says, but in this special relationship, there's a particular way that I desire for you to live. And this is where we find ourselves today, starting our adventure through the Decalogue, okay, which literally is 10 words, 10 things, 10 sayings of God, the 10 commandments. And before we begin exploring that first commandment, there's some things that I want to share with you, some really cool, interesting things, I think, anyway. So if we read verse 1, it says, and God spoke all these words. Okay, and so we're going to start there. It says that one of the ways that this can be interpreted is that God himself spoke directly with the people, opting out of that usual intermediary style that he's had. Okay, so up to this point, God has gone through Moses and sometimes Aaron to deliver his messages. But it begins this particular section with, and God spoke all these words. And to kind of affirm that, that's probably him speaking, if you look a little later in chapter 20 in verses 18 to 19, it says, when the people saw the thunder and lightning and heard the trumpet and saw the mountain in smoke, they trembled with fear. They stayed at a distance and said to Moses, speak to us yourself and we will listen, but do not have God speak to us or we will die. Okay, so now this isn't definitive proof that it was God speaking, but it certainly, to me, lends to that interpretation that God, for this particular Decalogue, for these 10 things he wanted to say to the